Welcome to episode 281 of Control the Controllables. And we're bringing a CTC short to you today. Now, April the 20th, 2026, we have the sad news that Dr. Jim Loehr passed away, age 83. And now anybody that hasn't come across Dr. Loehr in their lives really should. I was very fortunate to have him on the podcast a few years ago, and I received a call. Actually, I was at the Sort Tennis Academy, and my phone rang. And probably the best storyteller I've ever known is Captain Gully, Tom Gullickson. And he just starts telling me a story. He starts telling me this amazing story about how, when he was playing, he was really struggling with his mind. And he'd heard about this sports psychologist, but at the time it was like the undone thing. You just absolutely did not have a sports psychologist because it was seen as a sign of weakness. This is back in the 70s, playing against John McEnroe and these type of players. So he spoke to Dr. Jim, and he said it just transformed his life, transformed his career. But he had an agreement with Dr. Loehr that he either paid him or he would do it for free, but he had to let everybody know that he was speaking to him, and that was the reason why he'd had this upturn of fortunes on the court and this mental strength and all of these things. And Gully turned around and said, I'm going to pay you. I'll pay you any day of the week. I'm not letting anybody know that I'm so weak that I'm speaking to a sports psychologist. Now, fast forward 40, 50 years, and I think pretty much every single tennis player on the tour now will have someone. I call them mental fitness coaches. Often they'll have a couple different aspects of their life, and obviously this area is just incredibly important. And Jim was a star. He was our first superstar sports psychologist in the sport of tennis. I will be forever grateful to Gully for putting us in touch, and for me having the opportunity. I've never met him in person, but to have that conversation with him on the podcast a few years ago, apart from the fact that I'd lost my voice completely when we had the conversation, but I didn't need my voice in that conversation because I had two ears to listen to the wisdom. He sadly passed away at age 83, so I would have spoken to him when he was late 70s, maybe even 80 years old. And what a delightful man. And we just thought, in honor of Dr. Jim, we wanted to put out a short, but then I've listened back to the little snippet that we're about to share with you now, and I will absolutely be going back and listening to the full episode as well, because it is just pearls of wisdom after pearls of wisdom. And yeah, so thank you to Gully, thank you to Dr. Jim Loehr, and thank you for everything that you brought to us in the tennis world, in the sports psychology field. And if any of your family are listening to this, your dad, your uncle, your husband, your friend was a delightful man, and long will his legend live on in the sport of tennis, and we're so thankful. But it's a shortish clip, 12-13 minutes. Hope you enjoy it. Sure, you'll take lots from it. I'll pass you over to the amazing, the late, the great Dr. Jim Loehr. So can you tell us and tell the listeners about the hidden scorecard? Because I think this is an absolute gem for everybody. And if you could then link that in with the Dan Jansen story, I think it would be fantastic.
Okay. So, I've been very fortunate to work with all these world champions, people who've done amazing things. They climbed the mountain of success and they were at the pinnacle. They were number one in the world. And you would expect that these folks would experience this incredible fulfillment because their mission was complete. And not in every case, but those who had a particular mindset felt like, I've been working all these years for this, so I'm number one in the world. I'm the best in this sport. I still feel a little empty. It doesn't feel like enough. Maybe I have to be number one for more weeks. Maybe I need to win another this kind of tournament, major event. And the more they would do it, the more they realized that the satisfaction didn't come from that. There was something else that they were yearning for that just they missed. And Andre Agassi went through that. If you're looking for a book that helps people understand that, the book Open, Andre Agassi's book, is one of the best reads I have found that really helps people understand. He was told his whole life that he would be happy and fulfilled if he became number one in the world and had all the money and fame and everything. And he did it, and it didn't happen. He was not that happy, not that fulfilled. And his ranking dropped at that moment to 141 in the world. And he just thought, I can't do this anymore. And he and his trainer, Gil Reyes, paused, did a kind of a serious reflection. And they realized that purpose wasn't very fulfilling. It wasn't all about him. And so he reinvented himself, so to speak. And this is getting into this hidden scorecard. And what he did was he decided to go back into tennis, but armed with a different purpose. And that was, he had always wanted to reach out and help young people, have them a really safe and really complete education in a way that maybe his life wasn't that way. And he saw lots of other young people in Las Vegas. They didn't have that opportunity. So he took his fame, his money, his sponsors, and said, I'm going to devote my tennis to building a charter school for kids, that they can have an opportunity in life that most kids from their socioeconomic level would never have that opportunity. And so, armed with that new purpose, he went back out and played the same sport and came number one again in the world. But this time he found fulfillment. He found a sense of peace and satisfaction, because it really wasn't all about him. It was about what he could do for others that was the most fulfilling thing. And I have had so many experiences with these very high performers. And there is this, I came to call it the hidden scorecard, where we have this extrinsic marker of success, but that's not the ultimate game. It appears, though, that we are all operating on a different scorecard that's kind of hidden, and that is our treatment of others as we climb the mountain, and our connection to others, our connection to family, our connection to making a contribution that is beyond simply ourselves. It's called a self-transcending purpose. That your ability to make a difference in the world above and beyond yourself, when you look at what people want to be remembered for, it's not the number of titles, but the impact they had on others, most importantly, family and people they cared about. That's where the satisfaction came from. And that's what sustains greatness. So you can climb the mountain, but that's the what you did. It's how you got there, and your connection and purpose in really scaling that mountain and chasing like a maniac to be a victor. What are the criterias of real success here? And so that was for me a great insight, and I've been able to help a lot of really talented world stars that really struggle with this. And it happens in music, it happens in performance, dancing, it happens in just about every area of life, that your connection to others, your treatment of others, is probably the gold standard of a fulfilled and satisfying life. So, and the Dan Jansen story, I'll make it relatively brief, but Dan started his Olympic quest in Sarajevo as a very young guy, and then he quickly became known as the most extraordinary 500-meter speed skater in the world. And at Calgary, he was to win a gold medal. And about just a few hours before his race, he learned that the person that mattered most to him in the world, the person he was closest to, was his sister Jane, that she had died of leukemia. And he thought that there's any way that he would have known this, he would have flown back and he would have foregone the Olympics, but he didn't know that. And he broke down. He was emotionally just so distraught. First of all, that he wasn't there when she died. And he was thinking very seriously of just leaving and not skating. And his father asked him, well, what would Jane want you to do? Would she want you to skate, or would she want you to leave and go to the funeral? And he said, well, I'm pretty sure she'd want me to stay and skate. And he says, well, why don't you fulfill that wish that she probably has for you? So he put his skates on and he was in tears, completely emotional, the fastest man on the planet in the 500 meter by far. And just a few meters out of the gate, he falls. And Dan Jansen virtually never fell. And he was in tears again as he fell, because he said, I can't do this. And then 4 days later was the 1,000 meter, which he was never really known for. And his dad said, why don't you devote this 1,000 meter race to her and give it everything you got? So he mobilized and he went to within just a few meters of the front of the goal of the finish marker. And he was ahead. He was ahead of everybody, which was like the most stunning thing ever. And out of nowhere, it wasn't even a turn, he fell hopelessly to the ice. And thus began the saga of Dan Jansen, what was called the Heartbreak Kid. And he repeatedly had difficulty after that. In every press conference, have you forgotten the death of your sister? Will you fall again? You've fallen all these times. Now you're going to fall again. Couldn't get it out. And his agent called me and said, if we don't do something with Dan, he's going to go down as the greatest speed skater in history never to have won a medal, and maybe the greatest choker in sports history. And so I said, well, I'll do everything I can. So we trained for 2 years. And just before we started, right about that time, he went into Albertville. And again, he slipped and he didn't fall. But then he went into the 1,000 meter and he came in 26th in the world. And I had him I have all of his training logs. I just looked at them the other day. And at the top of his training log, I had a couple of things that I felt the 500 was so unforgiving that he could be a great 1,000 meter. He had so much genius, so much skill. I said, you can be a 1,000 meter skater. I want you to write at the top of your training log, I love the 1,000. And he said, that's not true. I don't love the 1,000. I hate the 1,000. I just do it for training purposes. I said, I want to teach you how your brain works. If you say that and you do it with intensity and intentionality, your brain will start changing. You're rearranging the furniture between your ears. And I said, what do you really want to have happen before you finish? And he said, well, I'd love to get some kind of medal. I don't know. I'd just like to end my career with a medal because I got one more Olympics and that's it. I'm done. And I said, okay, so a medal and what else? And he said, I'd like to break, if possible, the 36-second barrier in the 500 before I retire. That's like the Roger Bannister 4-minute mile. It can never be broken. So we wrote 35.99 at the top of all of his training logs. And he broke the 36-second barrier 4 times before his final race at Lillehammer. And he came in 26th in the 1,000 2 years earlier at Albertville. And in the 500 meter, I flew to Lillehammer because I never came to most of his events, but I hid. I didn't even have credentials because I didn't want him to know I was there. I didn't want to add any additional pressure. But I wanted to be there in the event that he didn't win a gold medal or a medal in the 500, that we could mobilize for the 1,000, his final race of his career. And he slipped slightly in the 500, and he came in 8th, and so that was gone. So I tried to maneuver myself across the arena and to let him know I was there, and had all these, people, police officers and everyone else trying to keep me, and I kept screaming at Dan, and finally he heard me and he looks over and he about fainted that there I was. And So we went down, and for the next 4 days we trained, and he remembered, and he said, I have to tell you, I don't know, I would never have believed it, but I think I love the 1,000 meter more than the 500. And it was that race, the 1,000 meter, that he had come in 26th in the world 2 years earlier. He had 7 people that had faster times than he had in his career, one of them being Kevin Scott, who was the world record holder. He won an Olympic medal, and he broke an Olympic record. And he got the monkey off his back. And he demonstrated that no matter how bad it gets, there is always hope. And one of the big takeaways, I think, for Dan was that he would have been okay, that he recognized that speed skating was a gift to him. No matter what happened, he would have been grateful for all the opportunities this sport had given him, and that he was going to give the best he could no matter what happens. And he would be okay with it. And he wanted to show how much joy and how grateful he was in his final race for having this opportunity and all the sacrifices that people had made so that he would have a chance to skate. And he blew the top off. He just astonished the world. It's one of the greatest stories, I think, in sports history. And the reason I felt that is he's such a good guy. I really appreciate and respect who he is as a person. And he did everything we had asked him to do over that course of that 2-year period. And the story ended the way it should have ended. Not always in sport does it end that way, but that story ended because he was the best in the world. And he proved that he could be the best in the world in a race that everyone said was never going to happen for him. And he changed that mindset, and he changed his history. And so that, for me, it was a wonderful story, a wonderful guy, and I was very privileged to be part of it.
And as I said at the start, you would take a lot from that, and I'm sure you did. I absolutely did. Please do. We will have the link into the full episode as well. Go back and listen. He's the 4th most downloaded episode that we've had, but let's make it the first. We've had some incredible people on the podcast, but to be getting these bits of wisdom and the hidden scorecard, what a great idea. That's a massive takeaway that I took from it. It was something I definitely started trying to implement into my coaching. It's something, we talk all the time about, tennis is the vehicle, right? But it's not the final destination, and getting our players and getting people to understand where that fits in, where you have that true purpose, that's when powerful things happen. And, I actually want to shout out high impact athletes at this point. Marcus Daniel and his team, they do incredible job. It's another one. We'll share the link. Marcus was on the podcast, but basically people giving part of their their prize money back at the end of every year. I know Gabby Dabrowski is part of that. I've been lucky enough to coach for the last 3 years, and many of the players, many players on the tour are doing it, and they'll put a certain percentage of their prize money towards greater causes. And I know with many of the tennis players, that's made a massive difference, and that's been their hidden scorecard. It's not just about hitting tennis balls for themselves, but it's like winning more matches, getting better, doing these things, that goes on, and that is giving back to whatever the different causes are. And again, we'll put a little link into that for you guys to see on the podcast notes. But it's well worth looking into. But this does make a massive difference. And then I just wanted to kind of share one, I suppose, final thing. We can talk about manifestation, the Dan Jansen story, all of these things, which is so important. But treatment of others is the gold standard of a fulfilled and satisfied life. And if we could all live like that, if we could all live by that, and we could all look after each other in that way, I think we'll all have a very, very fulfilled and satisfied life. And that is how I'd like to leave this episode. Hope you enjoyed Dr. Jim Loehr. May he rest in peace, and all of our love to everyone and all of his loved ones. And thank you from all of us at Control the Controllables. But until next time, I'm Dan Kiernan, and we are Control the Controllables.